Okay.
All right. Welcome everybody. This is Eli Lipman with Move LA. We're just gonna wait another 30 seconds for folks to jump into the Zoom. Um, Monica, do you want to pull up our the slides? Hello, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming in. We're just gonna give it a couple more seconds for folks to join in. Um, my name is Eli Littman. I'm the executive director for Move LA. Um, hello, everybody. Hope you can see me. Trying to keep cool. It's pretty hot out there. Uh, Rode the bus today. Had a great time on the bus, the 212. I hope folks are out there riding transit because this is SoCal Transit Month. And we are here for SoCal Transit Month. And what is that? It's about building community of interest around public transportation to improve it. We have events all month and all across the state. We actually have some fun upcoming or events happening right now, including Dress to Impress, which is basically take transit like I did today, put something fun on, put something. Last year I wore a tuxedo. I think it's too hot for that this time. Somebody said I should get one of those tuxedo shirts. Post on social media. We have some amazing prizes. If you scan the QR code, you can learn more about what we're doing. We have a ride with Move LA this Saturday where you'll take the bus for a night at Hollywood Forever. For those fans of This Is Spinal Tap, the classic at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. So check it out, SoCalTransitMonth.org for more events. If you are in the Bay Area, we have transitmonth.org for Bay Area events. And then this year we also have San Diego. So there's SD Transit Month for San Diego events. So we've got over 50 events happening throughout the state. Um, we also just want to recognize our sponsor. So it's presented by Metro this year, and we really appreciate that. We're working with DWP, High Speed Rail, and Dashboard Earth to put on these great events. I recommend everyone to go to dashboard.earth, where every time you ride the bus, train, metro during SoCal Transit Month, you can log your trip in the app and you can earn tickets to win prizes. You can track your climate impact and help our community avoid climate emissions. So that's our kind of promo on what we're doing and what this is all about. Thank you for joining everyone. But I want to start the panel off right away. I want to introduce you to the moderator for today, Halima. She is a nationally recognized leader in transportation equity. She's currently managing transportation solutions at San Jose State University, and she leads a campus-wide effort to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips and advocate for student-centered mobility solutions. She's got a background in mobility justice, public safety, non-carceral policy design, and she did a really incredible program called Phase One of Not One More Girl, which was a youth-led campaign about addressing gender-based violence on BART, and authored a report on how we reimagine transit safety. So she's well accomplished. I've been on a panel with her before, so I'm really excited to kind of hand it over to her. She's probably a little exhausted because she just came back from a really amazing trip to visit family in London, but I really appreciate you doing that. So take it away, Halima.
Thank you, Eli. I'm really excited to be here with all of you for this very important conversation. As we know, this is a very, very timely issue that we've seen happening right now. And we're here to talk about how immigrant communities are navigating public transportation, and in particular, thinking about folks who rely on public transit to get to work, school, medical appointments, and just stay connected to their communities. And so our panel is going to explore several important questions around how ICE rates impact immigrant families and transit usage, how immigrant workers, students, and families are navigating these challenges, and what strategies can all of us here implement to make transit more safer and accessible and inclusive. And so I'm very honored to introduce our panelists who will share various angles to this issue. And we'll start with Oscar, who is the Director of External Affairs at the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles. And prior to joining this organization, Oscar was a transit advocate for SAGE. Oscar is also a dreamer. And so we're really excited to welcome Oscar to the panel and hear his perspective. The next panelist I want to introduce is Dr. Cynthia, who is the Executive Director of SAGE, which is Strategic Actions for a Just Economy, a nonprofit that builds community leadership and power for economic justice by fighting for tenant rights, healthy housing, and equitable development. She came to this organization from the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, where she researched ways to increase energy efficiency in homes and businesses with the Repower campaign. And next we have Pamela joining us here from Immigrant Magazine. Pamela was born in Cameroon, Africa, founder and managing director of the Immigrant Magazine since 2003. Pamela is an ardent advocate for humane immigration reform and also the movement to restore the misplaced dignity of immigrants. And last but not least, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Laurel, who is a senior policy advocate at Public Advocates working on transit and climate justice in California. She's on the State Transit Transformation Task Force, and Laurel has a PhD in civil engineering from Georgia Tech and previously led the data and policy teams at MBTA in Boston. She was also a 2021 Open Society Foundation's Leadership in Government Fellow. And so we're really excited to have these very diverse perspectives who will share insights from policy, advocacy, and community organizing, really helping us to understand both the challenges and the solutions around transit access and safety. And before we dive in, I just want to remind folks that this is a space for open and respectful conversation. If you have questions that come up, please submit them through the chat or the Q&A feature. We will have time for Q&A towards the end of the panel, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. Again, this is such a timely topic, so please feel free to share any questions that you have, and we'll do our best to answer. And so with that, we will kick off our panel, and I would like to ask each panelist to share how ICE activity has affected the communities that you work with and their ability to safely use transit. Tell us what you're seeing on the ground in terms of fear, access to essential destinations, or changes in ridership, and also how your organizations have been responding to support communities through these challenges. And we can start off with Oscar.
Thank you, Halima, and it's really a pleasure to be on this panel with such great panelists, and I'm sure we're going to have a very, very engageful conversation. So again, my name is Oscar. I'm the Director of External Affairs here at CHITLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. Halima, what I captured is what are we doing to respond? Well, Chirla obviously is doing a lot of work. Mainly what I participate in is the Rapid Response Network, which is where we train and coordinate volunteers throughout the county in different regional teams to really document what's happening to our community. Right now, as I don't have to tell people here, but our community is being hunted for political reasons, right? Made an example of just to really exercise what I believe to be this president's kind of what's the word? Just attack on immigrant communities. And the stories that I'm hearing are atrocious, right? In the detention center, people are being deprived of basic constitutional rights, not allowed to talk to their families, being physically and mentally tortured. And this has an impact on their family, right? Just a couple of days ago, I visited a man who was, while being detained, suffered a catastrophic injury to his leg, was transported to UCLA Harbor, and was being denied legal counsel and the agents were trying to discharge him right after leg surgery. So we had to intervene, gather all of our legal partners, community partners, and elected officials to intervene. And when I went to this man, the first thing he told me is he's worried about his family, right? Apart from being worried about himself and his situation, but he's most of all worried about what's going on with his families, with rent payments, with kind of the basic necessities. And I think that kind of brings us back to transportation, right? A lot of these folks, they're losing breadwinners and need access to basic necessities like food, like transportation, to have some level of normalcy in a time of extreme chaos and violence. And I think that's where we step in, not just as community advocates, but also through our local governments to really provide what is needed for people to fight this battle, because that's what the strategy is in these detention centers, right? They want people to feel like they have no other options but to self-deport, to maintain their families and to keep their families somewhat with what they need to survive. And I mean, that's why we've been pushing for rent relief in the county and in the city and many other financial assistance and so forth, so that people who are in detention can keep that fight going. On the part of transportation specifically, thankfully, I think and here in LA, and I can't speak for the whole state or the whole country, we haven't, at least through our rapid response center, we haven't seen an alarming amount of activity on buses or rails so far. Obviously, there's a big amount of money that's going to be coming from the federal government to supercharge ICE and to supercharge detention. So we'll see what goes on after October when that money becomes available to those agencies. But I think it's just like LAUSD did with their outreach to families and their campaign. And please forgive me, I forget the name of their campaign, but they did a comprehensive campaign to really show families and parents that they had their back and that they were, know your rights and all those materials. I think that we need to see something similar for Metro, who has an overwhelming majority of their riderships who are immigrants, who are working class folks. Because I mean, we're already kind of seeing some of that effect on ridership. I haven't seen the most recent ridership numbers, but I think since the raids happened, there has been a significant slowdown on the ridership on Metro. And that's not what we're trying to see, especially with one of the country's biggest transportation agencies. So, and then the other thing I should say too is I also serve on Metro's advisory council. So I get to see some of these things kind of in real time, but that's kind of a synopsis, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Oscar, for your insights and for sharing about the impact that this has had, especially when you think about ridership numbers and also what this means for families. I would like to open up to panelists, whoever wants to jump in next, so that we can have an organic flow of conversation.
I can go ahead. Well, first of all, it's such an honor for me to be here. And Eli, I thank you so much for really, pursuing that I be on this panel. I am really honored. As someone in media, first of all, I am an immigrant. And as an immigrant, which is the reason why I got into media and advocacy, at the time, I didn't even know that what I was getting to was advocacy. It was just the narrative about immigrants that really perturbed me. And now I think about the fact that once upon a time, I was a new immigrant at the bus stop with families, with mothers and children, trying to get to work, trying to get to school. And I can't even begin to imagine the fear that would have gripped me at the time. Because today, based on research as a media person, I have found myself trying to understand why a demographic that contributes $1.6 trillion to this economy, whether documented or not, a demographic of 46.1 million first-generation immigrants that are hardworking and doing their best just to get by and yet contribute that amount of money to the economy, why they should have to live in such fear. I think about that and it really, really bugs me. We have to understand that the bus station or public transportation is where immigrants feel like they get their sense of livelihood, because without transportation, they can't get to work. The children can't get to school. And yet we paint them as these targets instead of seeing them as our neighbors and our families. For me, as a media person, which I'm founder of the Immigrant magazine, I think my responsibility at this point is really to humanize these stories, to tell the stories so people see that these are just families. We have to uplift these communities. These are workers, they're caregivers, they're students, they are neighbors. At the Immigrant magazine, we've done a lot of that. I'm glad we have Chila here. Oscar, I might not have met you, but or maybe we have met, but I've worked for a long time with Chila, with Baji, with all the various different groups. That's why I cover all the groups. For the for the African American, for the Black community and the Caribbean, oftentimes they don't have anybody really catering to them and they don't know what resources are out there for them. So that's why every time people always say, the Afro, but actually I cover all. They just happen to be that demographic that doesn't have media representation. And so I pay a lot of attention to them. And that's why we also got involved with the Stop the Hate last year. And we focus a lot on trying to make the community understand their civil rights, understand what to tolerate and what they're not supposed to tolerate. I think we have to amplify these stories in a humane way, because the majority of media, as we know, is not telling these stories, the stories of children, of caregivers, of families just trying to get to work. Every new immigrant, the first mode of moving from point A to point B is through the bus or a train. They can't afford the luxury of a cab even. So there's no safety in that. And right now we're talking about ridership. Ridership has dropped. I did the research and I found out that in Orange County, it had dropped 13%, in Los Angeles, 15% because of the raids. I had a neighbor who was undocumented and she couldn't go to work exactly for this reason, fear. And we have to understand now that it has escalated beyond being undocumented. So now we have people that are documented, but as we know, this administration is targeting beyond the undocumented. Even legal immigrants are threatened right now. So people with green cards or any visas are not safe. So now we are not talking about our undocumented. We are talking about everybody. Even the natural, I was speaking to an African American sister the other day and she said, I'm not even sure that I'm safe in this country. So that's what we're up against. I think what I'm here to do is to really listen more and to tell the stories and to humanize and let's really just find ways. How do we let them know their civil rights? I've been working with the Los Angeles Civil Rights Office of Capri Maddox. She did the LAs for Everyone, Just Say Hello campaigns, the Stop the Hate. I don't know where to go anymore. It's so challenging. I'm so happy, like, that you've convened this. I just got back, as you know, but I couldn't wait to be on this panel. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
A lot of world travelers here.
And I think you've highlighted, very important piece here, that it is not just immigrants at this point, everybody's impacted. And I think that is the tactic that has been used to have these very public shows of violence against not just immigrants, but anyone who might be perceived as immigrant or who might be perceived as undocumented. And really by proxy, this means that none of us are safe. And it speaks to how all of us are so interconnected, right? Our liberation is so interconnected, and all these systems of oppression work together hand in hand. I do want to pass it over to Cynthia to share some remarks.
Oh, thank you. So at Sage, we work mostly with low-income tenants, and we work all around LA County, but predominantly in South Los Angeles. And most of the tenants that we work with are immigrants. Either a lot of them are Latinx, but also we have a big immigrant community here from Belize, and also, some African immigrants as well. So it's really immigration from all over the world. And the transit nexus for our members is really strong because a lot of them rely heavily, if not exclusively, on public transit to be able to make their way around the city. And so there are two sort of bad things that have happened as a result of the ICE raids. One is that people just don't use transit because they're too scared to go to work. And that means that we've seen a real decrease in real wages. When we see a decrease in wages, it doesn't just affect the people who aren't making money. We also have folks who are like now out of work or looking for work because their workplaces, former workplaces, aren't functioning because there aren't enough people who are working in them. And of course, those economic impacts are going to have a ripple effect throughout the entire economy. It's not, it is, terrible that people are losing their wages, but it also, then has an impact on everything that they would have purchased or been able to purchase had they been working. And then, of course, the other consequence is that people who are having to ride metro anyway, and there's a real palpable sense of fear, and it's a terrible feeling to know that you're going to get on metro and you don't know if you're going to be able to reach your destination because somebody, may basically essentially abduct you. And that palpable sense of fear and disquiet, is now accompanying people in all aspects of their lives as they move around the city. And for us in our work, we work to lift up to lift up people's voices and increase civic participation. And of course, this isn't an effective immigration policy by any means, right? The sole purpose of this is to really, I think, sow terror and intimidate a workforce. Um, and so it really dampens our ability to do that. How can you can't really encourage people to be active residents of the city and active parts of the body politic if they're being actively discouraged from doing that by the very government that's supposed to represent them. And so what SAGE has had to do is pivot, from our work. We represent the interests of the indigent and serve the indigent, but we've had to pivot from that work and move over to, from doing in-person work to doing virtual work. We have a lot of concerns about digital security. We've been doing a lot of mutual aid work, delivering groceries and helping people in any way we can. That's great. It's not our mission. And I think that disrupting sort of the nonprofit infrastructure and forcing us to redirect all of our energies that are really supposed to be going towards supporting people to help themselves and instead be put back in a position where we're doing services, is this kind of a pernicious and I would suspect not unanticipated outcome from this kind of enforcement. And it is everybody who uses metro, who lives in the city of Los Angeles, is paying for metro through sales taxes, and so or fare box, or both. And so to really have people deprived of a method of transit that they themselves have supported and paid for, and to do it in such a terrifying way seems, it's just an egregious abuse, I think, of a system that was not designed to do that. Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, thank you for sharing. And I think that economic piece is so important, when we think about what this means for being able to put food on the table, but also what it means for the broader economy. I think when the ICE raids first started, in that very public fashion, we were hearing about farms that didn't have any workers. And that affects everyone again. So this is all very interconnected. Laurel, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, and I have some slides to present. So I wanted to talk about, in addition to the ICE raids, the other ways that this regime is impacting and attacking immigrant access to transit. And I'm going to talk a lot about the Civil Rights Act and 1964, so I put those pictures on this first slide to really remind ourselves that civil rights laws and laws come from movements and people working for change, and that they can also be taken away, right? The law in and of itself cannot protect us, that we have to fight both for the laws to be passed and for them to be implemented and preserved. It's not static. So I am from Public Advocates, which is a law, like a civil rights law nonprofit. I am, remember from my bio, not a lawyer, I'm an engineer, so take that in mind. But so I'm going to be talking about three ways that the Trump administration is attacking transit for all of us and for immigrant communities and what we can do in California. So first is going after the transit funding. So again, going back to movements, California, passed sanctuary law, and various cities have as well, coming from the actions of people to protect our communities. And one of the ways that the administration is coming after those laws is to try to tie transportation funding to cooperation with immigration enforcement. So the California Attorney General joined with 19 other state attorney generals to sue US DOT back in May for trying to take or threaten funding. And California gets over basically $4 billion in federal transit funding, which is about 31% of our transit funding. A lot of that is capital, some of it is operating funding, but would have a significant impact on our transit service if that funding was to be taken. And so there was a preliminary injunction issued in June, and this case is ongoing. So we are tracking this case. The second is sort of reminding yourselves of the Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and remembering that it includes national origin in it. And that ties to protecting language access. So right now, there is an existing civil rights precedent, Lau v. Nichols, that stands that recipients of federal funds are required to take reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access to limited English people with limited English proficiency, which is why there's translation on our transit systems. And this is being attacked. First, there was an executive order, sort of so-called English-only executive order, and then some guidance from the Department of Justice in July, which rescind the existing Civil Rights Act guidance that so they're basically ignoring this Supreme Court precedent. And so the first agency that has really, as far as I know, really gone full on implementing this is HUD, Housing and Urban Development. So they sent out a memo on August 19th, basically directing that everything be in English, and removing all translated materials from their websites and field offices and not offering translation services. So, and then this is a tweet or whatever it's called now from the HUD secretary, who is essentially bragging about the number of pages and documents that they took down. So it's a sort of a modern equivalent of book burning in a way of trying to brag about removing language access. I think it's really important to remember that this is them taking down their websites and saying that it's not required. So far, they have not gone all the way to say that it's not allowed, that they would deny federal funding to anyone who provided materials in other languages. And I think we need to keep reminding all of our agencies of that. So we are monitoring to see what US DOT is going to do on this front. And the second really big attack that falls under Title VI as well is attack on disparate impact, which is the legal theory that's used to analyze whether a policy that appears neutral has a disparate impact on protected communities, which currently transit agencies are required to do equity analysis on service and fares that use disparate impact analysis. So the Trump administration is trying to well, they have an executive order, and now there's agencies are being asked to remove their guidance and regulations that have to do with disparate impact. So for transit, the FDA has a circular that lays out how transit agencies do this disparate impact analysis that could come under attack or taken down. We are monitoring that. And if it does, then transit agencies won't have any guidance about how to do this analysis. I think this is really important as transit agencies face these fiscal cliffs, that if they are to do major service cuts without any federal requirements for equity analysis, we could see a major inequity in how service is distributed. So California does, the good news, have civil rights law that includes national origin as well. And in the California Code of Regulations, there is, reference to language access and disparate impact. So these are protected in California. However, we don't really have a well-established mechanism for the state to enforce civil rights law in these around disparate impact in particular. So there are ways that people can do file housing complaints, but we don't have a really established way for state enforcement or oversight of transit on the civil rights front. So that's something that we are considering, how we could build that up, how we can require the transit agents to continue to collect the data needed for disparate impact, and to monitor agencies to make sure that they don't start complying with orders, taking down translations, that kind of thing. So thank you very much, and I can stop sharing.
Thank you, Laurel. I think you're highlighting kind of some of the big picture pieces here that are very much, again, affecting all of us. Just recently, I heard that the work that I did with BART to tackle sexual harassment will have to be significantly altered to not mention sexual or gender-based harassment, but just to broadly speak on harassment. And this was at the behest of the Trump administration and their executive order around DEI. And so agencies are in a position where they may potentially lose or risk federal funding if they do not comply with these orders that are coming down. And for many of us here in California who are aware, we are dealing with a fiscal cliff, right? There's been many efforts to address that, and Laurel, I know you've been involved in some of those efforts. So if you could speak to what this trade-off is going to look like for transit agencies, right? Where they're going to be faced with this kind of decision and crossroads of, do we comply with this federal order, or do we lose federal funding? And both have a significant impact on ridership, on service, right? And some agencies can't afford to lose funding, and if they do, they might have to make cuts to their service. And on the other hand, we need agencies to stand up and say, this is unacceptable, and we need to continue to make sure that our services are equitable. And so there's these major kind of things to kind of consider. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, given the work that you've been doing around the fiscal cliff here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I think it is creating this potential hard spot for agencies. It is useful that the state of California Attorney General is pushing back on filed the lawsuit on behalf of all of us on the funding piece around cooperation with ICE. I suspect if there's any other big impacts on funding that the state would step up. But I do think that we need to keep reminding our transit agencies that we're only going to win by all collectively pushing back. And the more of us and the more agencies that push back, the less likely, and it is that they'll be able to continue to enforce all of these, draconian and what we might think are illegal actions.
Can I add something? I think and thank you for bringing up the fiscal cliff, Halima. I think that's been something that for at least 2 years we've been I've heard transit agencies trying to manage and find a solution for. But I think another thing that adds to that layer in Los Angeles specifically is the Olympics, right? Not only is our agency trying to deal with this looming fiscal cliff, there's also the great expense that the Olympics is, especially when it comes to transportation. And for me, coming from an immigrant advocate perspective, the Olympics are also a national security event, which means that DHS is involved, which means a larger opening for some of the atrocious violations we're seeing now currently. So I can only imagine what could happen, especially when we have so many nationals coming from different countries to come to the Olympics, and not even to mention the World Cup as well. So, and sometimes I hesitate to put this on the ether because I don't want to give anyone ideas to leverage such a moment to do even more heinous enforcement on our system. And you're right, Laura. It puts, and this is something I've asked our board here at Metro, like, because my fear is that they're gonna capitulate because they need the funding, because they need the money, right? And if they capitulate, at the end of the day, like most things, immigrants end up losing. So, yeah, just wanted to add that real quick.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I think it's like this mounting pressure of we have to kind of cave in if we want the resources to make these changes. And I think that creates an even stronger case for why all of us need to organize, not just within our regions, but at a state level, to really come together and make sure that our pushback, our movement is so strong that the agencies are not going to cave to these federal demands, and that we can absolutely make sure that we're prioritizing immigrant communities. Another thing that I was thinking about as you all were talking is the recent headlines that have been coming out about the new technology that ICE has procured, surveillance technology, spyware for phones. And it kind of ties into this broader conversation that we've been having in I would say in California, but also across the nation about technology, and the role of technology in enforcement. We have seen a proliferation of these technologies in our transportation system, from red light cameras, automated license plate readers, and there are in California laws in place such as SB 34 that say that this data cannot be shared, but we saw a few months back in Cal Matters and in local headlines that Oakland police had been sharing that data with ICE. And so there is this concern about having these technologies on our transportation system, and also this concern about the unlawful sharing of data from these technologies between agencies, right? And we've heard also for certain technologies that they're the ones that are privately owned and run, that they are making deals with law enforcement. They're willing to share that information. And so I'm wondering, within the context of the surveillance technology and transportation, what are some strategies that we can use to ensure that we are holding our agencies accountable, especially when it comes to the existing laws around SB 34, and also making sure that we are slowing down and stopping to the best of our ability the further advancement of these technologies. And I do think that transit advocates have been kind of all over the place. There hasn't been a real consensus that we shouldn't be using these technologies. Two legislative cycles back, there was a bill about having automated speed enforcement, and there were a few advocates that were against and a few that were for, but there was no shared consensus for the transit community to come out strong against it, and ended up passing. And now we're seeing it rolled out in cities like San Francisco and San Jose, where we have these technologies being put into neighborhoods, and more often than not, they are put in historically redlined communities, historically low-income Black and Brown communities. And so we really have a lot of work to do, I think, in how do we get our coalitions on the same page about this. But I would like to open it up to hear from all of you, your thoughts about this, and how do we make sure that we hold this accountable and that we slow down and stop the harm as much as we can.
I don't know if this isn't exactly an answer to the mechanics of how, but I think, well, maybe it is. I think one thing too is that we really need to think about how we're messaging and organizing this to broader communities, and one kind of an anticipated consequence of the pressure on folks to not move around and to stay at home in order to be safe, is that for a lot of immigrant communities who came to the United States because they thought it would be a safer place to be, to raise families, where they would be free from government terror, where they wouldn't have some rights that aren't accorded to them necessarily in other places that they're coming from, that this has been a real wake-up call and a politicizing moment to activate people and to get them to see the connections between a police state and between surveillance and to really think about what they may have to sort of stand up for in the United States in a way that they may not have been thinking about before. And so I think that in terms of like, how do we get together to fight that? Part of it is to really being able to activate folks and get them motivated to understand the systems that are being put into play against them and to make their voices heard.
Laurel, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just to add to that, I was speaking to some folks this morning and we were thinking about how sort of traditionally this has been framed of like, oh, you have to give up some privacy for safety. And that, well, that framing has never worked for some people. It really needs to be challenged now that the more privacy we're giving up, we're actually becoming potentially less and less safe with the amount of surveillance that is available and what is being done with it. And so I think sort of rethinking, yeah, how we communicate to people about safety and how important privacy is to prevent surveillance is going to be really important.
I can add real quick, and yeah, I can add real quick. I think recently, kind of unfortunately, I think in my opinion, we've seen kind of the militarization of LA Metro with the addition of people have seen those fare gates that they've added on, and then it's all in the name of safety, right? But I think sometimes the safety conversations, because in Metro, there is some safety concerns I think riders feel, but what's more unsafe? Being on the road or being a pedestrian on the street. You're more likely to face a vehicle or a crash, and that's way more harmful. And Halim, you asked a question about organizing and what could be our advocacy strategy. I think for me is we have to engage the workers, right? We recently saw a story a couple of weeks ago here in LA about a Metro bus rider who was like, "Hey, I'm not gonna open the bus to ICE. That sounds crazy to me, right? Is that the right or wrong thing to do? But that's up to the bus driver. But I think for me, in order to be successful in questions about surveillance or just general safety policies on our transit systems, I think it's important we engage the workers that make that system run, right? And I think that's how we're maybe going to find some more advances in the way that policy is formed. So the bus drivers or custodial workers that do so much work. I know at LA Metro we have transit ambassadors now who I'm sure have opinions on how safety is achieved on the system. So for me, that would be my offering.
I wanted to just jump in here too. I was at the LAX Transit Center the other day, which obviously will get a lot of international visitors, and they were actually handing out the Know Your Rights cards that the LA Federation of Labor put together, and they were handing it to folks who are arriving, and I thought that was really great. And I think we have to think about how the transit agencies know that immigrants are their riders. We have to see them as partners in this. I had some initial conversations back in November with some of the board members who I would think, would be huge allies in declaring like the agency a sanctuary agency. And they said, look, like we want to do all the things to make immigrants safe, but if we put out a resolution that says we're a sanctuary agency, um, it creates this target, right? And they are now producing lists of sanctuary cities. And I understood their logic. I think it was flawed, but I do think that there's the opportunity to do all the things that you would do to protect immigrants as an agency without, outwardly showing that. I think the other thing too that we have to recognize is this administration is not, as we heard earlier, right? They're just focused on English speakers, right? So if we're messaging and the agency is messaging in the languages that our immigrant riders use as their second language or even as their primary language, gosh, like they're not going to know that that's happening. And so I haven't been encouraging Metro to like have red cards and have know your rights information in various different languages. I mean, we have so many languages: Arabic, Tagalog, Spanish, obviously, Chinese, Thai. I mean, there's so many languages that are spoken in just in LA. I think it's the most of anywhere in the world outside of home countries. They can be providing those, and this administration, frankly, will be none the wiser because they're not reading anything but English. So we have to be strategic, I think, but we can still be, I think, supportive and push policies and implementation with the operators and others that can support our communities.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and say, I agree with everything that everyone has said. And I think the Know Your Rights campaigns will be really crucial. I'm just wondering in the space of transit, because we've been doing the Know Your Rights campaigns when someone comes to your door, what to do, what to ask, what not to open the door and stuff like that. I don't know how we can make it effective in the transit space. I'm thinking also that the operators are very key because they hold the ability to, I mean, the first line of defense probably for our immigrants, especially those who will already be on the bus or on the train. What kind of training can we give them, especially because we are in the sanctuary state, even though it makes us a target? However, it's a state we're sympathetic to the plight of immigrants. I think we need to engage with legal aid groups, NGOs, to try to make families not be such a target. And of course, media has to play a crucial role in this, in disseminating the proper information, because I think there is a heightened fear and anxiety in the communities. If a parent can't go to the hospital with a child that's sick because they rely on public transportation and now they can't do that. So how do we rally our communities? How do we rally ambassadors of sorts in various communities where we feel that they are high targets? Is there something that the NGOs can do to assist families who may be targeted? I don't know the answer to all these questions, but I think having this discussion is very crucial, and maybe we can start to find ways to work around the obvious challenges. This is really, really difficult, really difficult.
Yeah, and I think transportation is a lifeline, right? Literally, if you do not have access to transportation, that is a life or death difference for some people. It is a difference between going to the hospital, as you said, Pamela, or not. It is a difference between being able to go to work or not. And so we really need to think about what is a rapid response that we need to bring together. And California has been targeted specifically by the federal administration to kind of make this case that if we can do it in liberal parts of the country, we can do this anywhere and we can get away with worse. And so this is a time for us to come out hard and strong as a community. And I'm wondering to kind of hear from all of you on the solution side, what are some strategies that we can implement or we can ask our transit agencies to implement that can make sure that our immigrant communities can safely ride public transportation, right? Whether it is a Know Your Rights campaign that goes out, whether it is making sure that we actually preserve and hold on to language access. I'm curious to hear from all of you about some of the strategies that we should be pushing for with transit agencies, and then also mutual aid, because at the end of the day, government is limited in how much they're going to be able to do for us. And I'm often reminded in these moments that we are all we have, right? This is the cavalry. No one is coming. This is it. And so, what do community-based organizations, nonprofits, mutual aid groups, what is their role in this as well, in putting together resources, whether it is support groups, people looking out for each other, people traveling together, having bystander intervention trainings. So I want to open it up to hear from all of you about some of the solutions that we should be considering for our own organizations and our own community groups, but also strategies that we need to push with transit agencies.
This is a really this is a really daunting task, Halima, because like we've said, transportation is a lifeline, is survival, is the ability to provide for your family. So I really think that all immigrant allies should support, we should come up with transit policies that protect immigrants' ability to ride while preserving their dignity, to be able to go take their children to school, to be able to do what they need to do to survive. I think we all should join campaigns that defend immigrant rights, the rights of immigrant riders. I haven't heard much in that space until Eli really brought this up. I wasn't thinking. So I think awareness is really important because we think about all the other aspects of what immigrants are going through, but we have not thought about transit, about transportation, because I didn't even have my ears tuned to that. So right now, I think awareness and finding those policies and finding the loopholes as well for the legal minds that could protect the immigrant riders. Again, I think operators, the stand as one of the key lines of defense for our riders. If someone's already on the bus, what does that look like? Can ICE just go on the bus and take you out of the bus? So I'm thinking in that kind of sense. And if someone's at the bus stop, what are their rights? What should they know? Yes, the know your rights thing, but I'm thinking that we need to dig deeper. Just my thoughts.
Absolutely. And I think Laurel,
Go ahead, Laura. I'll go after.
Oh yeah, well, I was going to agree with you, Oscar, about needing to work with our transit workers on this for sure. And they're obviously on the front line of the response. And then I mean, the other way that we've been thinking about it, as I mentioned in my slides, is, you know, where can the state do more? You know, how do we push California to actually live up to what it's promising to do more to protect, you know, not just the day-to-day on riders, but to make sure that we have enough funding for transit, that we have enough that we have equitable transit services, all the things to make sure that people have access, that we have language access. And then I also I was sort of noticing that we've got some folks around the country in the chat, and that's great to see some folks even out late on the East Coast, and sort of wanted to point out the post from Carol in DC that I know that DC right now, like a lot of the armed National Guard and other federal law enforcement are targeting Metro, DC Metro really heavily, so that it is something that we also have to prepare for, thinking about. And I want to very much learn from our allies and comrades in DC about what they've been doing and how they've been responding, because I've seen articles about, you know, the like crackdown on fare evasion as part of the crackdown on crime in DC and targeting of Metro riders there. So I think we're going to have to learn from everyone across the country of what's working, what tactics have been tried, how can we evolve as they evolve their tactics, evolve ours. And I think I saw some folks from Chicago on here too, so I know Chicago is gearing up.
Well, I mean, yeah, and thank you for the question. I think what I would offer is, I know Cynthia and Eli have heard me talk about this a lot, but making the transit fare free, I think, is one solution. Just because, again, what I said in the beginning of our conversation, there's real economic stress that comes from losing your breadwinner, and I think that would be one great way to support our families or support the families who have been impacted by these atrocious rates so far. The other thing is, and it's been mentioned already, but a comprehensive Know Your Rights campaign, not just for the public, but also workers, so that I know I've heard already this from Metro, but obviously we can't prevent them from coming into public spaces, but we can definitely do all we can to prepare riders in case they are confronted by ICE agents, either within stations or at bus stops or outside of stations. And I also think the agency as a whole needs to develop a plan when ICE immigration enforcement activity does happen within their premises, right? Obviously we can't interfere in any way, but there's so much you can do in terms of documenting and facilitating access to legal counsel to your writers that I don't think Metro has explored yet. And even creating private areas, labeling private areas at stations, and maybe it's harder at bus stops, but exploring that as well. I think there's been a hesitation, and maybe it's what Eli mentioned about the agency not wanting to put a target on their back. But the inverse of that is that the community is not seeing, right? You're not putting a target on your back, but you're also not demonstrating support or solidarity, or that the agency is with the immigrant community in one of its more difficult times, which I've seen other large institutions, and I'm going to point to LAUSD, have done, right? The superintendent has been, I mean, I'm sure we've seen his press conferences when he goes out there and he's like, I've been undocumented as well. It's some of it is theater, but it really does mean something to those parents at LAUSD. So, I mean, and that's the kind of leadership that you need at this time, right? Like, where is our CEO, Stephanie Wiggins? What has she said in the public eye? Those things might feel performative, but they actually have a real value for families that are in total fear. So those are the things I would offer.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned kind of that differentiator between public and private space, because that creates additional layers for ICE to have to get through if you're in a private space versus if you're in a public space. And it also makes me think about community organizations, businesses, people who are situated next to bus stops, right? If they are able to kind of offer almost private spaces or sanctuaries where people can have that space. Not that that has entirely stopped ICE, because they have done a lot of things that I think many of us thought would not happen. I think in the first iteration of the Trump administration, people were seeking refuge in churches, right? And that was a protected space. It was a sanctuary space, and it doesn't feel like that kind of thinking or actions would apply to the administration that we're dealing with right now, and kind of the way that they've come back. But still, I think it's worth exploring, right? That difference between private and public space, and what community organizations and businesses who have that proximity to transit could potentially offer, and also how we could pull together our resources. And I think, I think to the point that you've made, Oscar and Pamela, like just the level of the lack of statement that has been made around this, and the lack of connection that has been made around transportation and ICE and immigration, I think is contributing towards this ongoing silence that we've seen in this gap. And so I think it's great that we're kicking off Transit Month with this conversation. And there's so many more opportunities that will be coming up where we can continue to make those ties. But I just wanted to name that.
Thank you. Yeah, I thank you, Halima. And I wanted to also just bring into this space, I think there is an interesting legal case that may come out of, what is a public and private space, particularly around transit. And it'd be interesting to test that. I think the other thing that we should also recognize is like the allyship, right? I mean, there are folks who are coming out and protesting in support of immigrants, particularly those who might be fearful to be out on the street protesting. And, there's been some incidents here in Los Angeles. And I think this is important because I know I see Renard in the chat. I see folks from all across the country, right? There were multiple cases of protesters being basically stranded by the transit agency because of a curfew that was instituted suddenly, including my wife and child. And I was freaking out because they're texting me and saying, Metro says there's no more trains here. We're stuck in the station. There are LAPD at the entrance to the station. We have nowhere to go. So I was like about to like jump in and like bust through the the downtown curfew, but they finally were able to, they ran one more train and were able to get everybody out of the station. But, people are going to be fearful to stand up and stand up for the rights of folks if, they also feel as if they can't sort of, ensure that they have safe passage back and forth. And so, again, back to your point, Halima, earlier, is like this impacts all of us, right? The decrease in ridership in LA, I am pretty sure has increased traffic, right? On our freeways, right? That's a direct impact to all of us. The inability to get bread or go to a restaurant or go, get your favorite, taco, like, or, has impacted all of us and the ability for us to have the services and things that we need to have, to live the lives and the reasons why we're here in Los Angeles. So I think we have to like remember that, it isn't just a particular immigrant community, first of all, and it isn't just the immigrant community that's impacted by this. It's all of us, and I think that's an important message to take away from this. I know we're hitting it at about 7 o'clock. If there's still folks are still able to stick around, if there are more questions or. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have a few questions.
Okay.
I do want to make sure Cynthia gets an opportunity to share some calls to action and solutions, and then I will go to some of the items in the chat and Q&A.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I would know I've been a bit slow to respond. I was kind of pondering your question a little bit. I mean, I feel like there's so many things that we're trying to hold in tension right now, which makes it very difficult to know how to do that, including this first question of like, obviously you don't want to telegraph to your opponent what your next move is, and yet taking a public stand is very important. And I think that all of these things are getting held in the balance all the time. Um, and this is an administration that delights in political theater, which I think you could argue as horrific as the ICE raids are, they're also very ineffective immigration policy. They're clear, it's not about immigration. It really is about political theater. And so what are some ways in which we can like engage in those same kinds of theatrics, in a way that's really productive? I also feel like the conservative forces have been like much more advanced than we have in terms of like pushing things much farther than we thought they were going, and so I think we're always reluctant to think as far ahead as we may have to. Like some of the suggestions for defending ourselves, we're democracy to fail, which I think is sort of implied in the like we're all we have, are things that I don't almost really want to talk about yet because I feel like it's such a dire scenario that we're painting. But yeah, I mean, regardless, transit would always be a key piece of infrastructure. And I think you can say that ICE attacks transit to get at immigrants, but it's also attacking immigrants to get at transit in the sense that immigrants, I think, are a wedge into denying the public the access to public resources. And, I don't want to get into the sort of the first they came for blah, blah, blah scenario, but I think that that's obviously like very much, controlling one group of people is just a stepping stone to controlling everybody.
Mm. Yeah, I'm thinking of the press conference that the statement that LA City Council member Eunices Hernandez gave right when that attack happened. I'm forgetting the name of the park. Was it Glen Park in LA?
MacArthur Park.
MacArthur Park, and her comment that this is a practice site, right? And this if you think this is just in LA, you're wrong. And so yeah, we don't want to go into dire scenario, Cynthia, but I also feel like it's kind of getting there, right? And I think if we don't sound the alarms and if we don't act with clarity, and if we don't act with very clear charge of what needs to be done, things could spiral. I always have to remind myself that we are not even 1 year in to this administration, and we still have 3.5 years to go, and it's daunting. But I also believe, I have hope. I'm reminded of the words of Miriam Kaba, who says that hope is a discipline, right? It is a responsibility, it is a political obligation, it's a moral duty. And so as much as this feels like overwhelming and scary and just, so much, we also have to have hope, and we have to keep showing up And so I do want to transition over to some of the comments in the chat and the Q&A. I saw a couple of notes about immigration and how this is also impacting people with disabilities, people who are immigrants and people with disabilities. And I do want to bring disability justice into the fold, right? If any of you have any insights that you'd like to speak to on that particular intersection of disability justice and immigration, and transportation, how do we protect immigrants with disabilities within this case, especially when their mobility is already limited, right? And we're dealing with potentially paratransit systems that we know for far too long have remained very much unequal, right? Despite what the ADA has said, paratransit systems have they're so dated. You have to book them 24 hours in advance. You can't have a same day spontaneous trip. Some people are still paying in cash or faxing their checks. So it's a very old system that folks are already struggling with. When you add this layer of ice, it yeah, I can't even imagine, but I do want to open it up to the panelists to speak to that.
I can't say, go ahead. You're gonna go, Laura? Go ahead. I'll go after you.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say that I do think really getting reassurances from our agencies that they're not sharing like the paratransit booking data would be really important, since that is like trips tied to individuals and their destinations and origins are known. Would be one step.
I want to jump in on this one too, because Laurel's been a fantastic advocate on the Transit Transformation Task Force for people with disabilities. I think, one of the things that we did as Move LA, talking as Move LA in 2008 and then in 2016 was say we can't rely on the federal government for public transportation funding. It goes up and down year over year, and then we have these different administrations. So we're going to pass a ballot measure in Los Angeles to fund our transportation operations, maintenance, and capital, and that gives us a reliable source of funding. And we did that with intention of knowing that federal funding would go up and down. And now, we're in a better place. We still have operations needs in LA, but we're in a better place than many transit agencies across the country. I think, as part of this task force that Laurel and I are on at the state, like we're really pushing for dedicated funding for paratransit services, but just ensuring that simple things like an elevator is always available, right? And transit. And so, I think we need to really push for the state to make it a priority, because we know that at some point the federal government may also cut off that federal funding that's being used for transit agencies to provide paratransit service. So I think that's really important as well. Oh, and good shout out from Kim, by the way. So SoCal Transit Month is done with intention, meaning it goes from now until October 4th, actually. We're going to end on October 4th because the South Bay is throwing a summit on transit. But October 1st is Clean Air Day, which is a fare-free day. Okay. Shout out, Oscar, fare-free. Let's get more. But also that week from September 29th through October 5th is the week without driving. And we did this with intention for SoCal Transit Month because that's an opportunity to talk about the challenges of people with disabilities in being able to get to and from where they need to go. And so we are working to encourage politicians in particular, but others to not drive during that week. And so that's part of the messaging and branding for SoCal Transit Month. I will do a quick plug too. I'm sorry, I just have to do this, but we are doing an event and we can post it. I'll ask my team to post it with Anna Zivarts, who who inspired Week Without Driving and wrote the book on these issues. It's on September 17th, also a virtual program. So we encourage you to RSVP for that program as well.
Oscar, did you want to contribute?
No. Laura and Eli said everything I had in my mind.
Got all the points covered. We got another question here that is asking about issues or interactions between immigration authority on transit, particularly asking if there's been incidents in Union Station or Metro Rail, also on the Bay Area transit agencies. They've said that many immigrants who unfortunately rely on transit have been curious if there have been issues because they haven't necessarily heard about these or they haven't been easily findable for the general public to know what's been happening. So I'm wondering if folks have heard about any incidents. And then also there's a way to find out, right? I've seen networks pop up where people are posting on Instagram, we saw ICE at so and so place. But sometimes it can also be disinformation. And also because of the nature of how ICE is showing up as unmarked, unverified, faces covered, things go around. But that has been kind of one of the ways that I've seen people giving each other a heads up to say there is ICE activity at this station or at this road. But I'm wondering, what other ways can the public find out if it's safe to go out on a certain day or certain location, and have you heard about incidents?
Um, again, here in LA, I haven't seen many. The places where I have seen accidents is bus stops. People get picked up at bus stops. But in terms of a raid happening within a bus or a train, I haven't seen that yet in LA. Just to caveat that in LA. And in terms of where to get the best information, I think you said it, Halima, like there's these Instagram pages that do share out sightings, but sometimes that information can be not so reliable. So, there's the good that, it gets publicized, but then also the bad that like sometimes it's misinformation or information that is not the most accurate. I mean, at Chila, it's a policy that we don't share out information that we get from our rapid response network. I mean, if you want to be informed, I mean, the best thing to do is to become a trained responder, and then you can be added to our network and kind of get a live feed into all of our rapid response activities. But I know that's not practical for the masses. Um, but I do know there's applications like people over papers that seem somewhat reliable, that kind of serve some good information. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Any others want to chime in?
I was just looking at the chat and someone is talking about the loss of workers, caregivers, especially in the disabled community, because as we know, most immigrants are the caregivers. So, like Eli said, it's not just about the immigrant community, it's all our safety. It's we need to really make this really beyond a civil rights issue. I think it's a humanitarian issue for all Americans. I don't know how we frame it, but I think we ought to. We're coming up on election midterms. Maybe we should try to go through policies as well and try to get in there how to protect immigrant riders, because the caregivers, the teachers, whoever, whatever profession, or just the parents, they need to displace themselves to go to work, to go to the farms, to put food on our tables. Whether you're an engineer or not, everybody's role is important in society. And immigrants, again, contribute $1.6 trillion to this economy. And so I think that says a lot. Imagine a day without them going to work. Maybe we should do a campaign. I don't know. But I think that with this conversation, we can begin something. We can begin to do something. We need to make Americans feel the pinch of what it's like not to have immigrants be able to go to work, be able to go to the hospital, be able to just live their lives. I think we need to bring it home.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely imagine a general strike, a day without immigrants, and we'll take away their spices also. I think that would be an extra.
You better believe that.
Just to wrap up, I see one last question here that is asking if anyone knows of a transit agency that has a strong policy protecting immigrants, and someone had cited BART as one of the first, if not one of the first, I do believe that is correct, agency to become a sanctuary agency. And that policy is based on not cooperating with immigration authorities, but it doesn't necessarily deny access. And so, wondering to hear from all of you if you have heard of any agencies that have implemented policies either currently or in the past, because again, the issue of immigration and ICE raids is not a new topic, but curious to hear if you have any that you want to highlight before we close out.
I don't have any to highlight, but I can sort of put a finer point on that clarification around BART, which is that there's a difference for agencies that have their own police departments and that don't in terms of their so I think BART made that policy about their police department is what I understand, and whether their police department would be cooperating with federal immigration affiliate, which is different than, as the commenter said, the access to
Yeah, I think there's
facilities.
definitely a need to push on this front to create those policies, and we have so much work ahead of us on this front. I know we are coming up at time, and I want to thank all of you for your contributions, for sharing your different perspectives, be it about the economic impact that this has had, or the impact on ridership, and also the connection to civil rights. This is, again, a great way to kick off Transit Month with such a urgent and time-sensitive topic. And I think this is really a call to action for all of us to think about what can we do in our various capacities to ensure that our immigrant community can safely travel, can have the lifeline and the access they need to healthcare, to education, to their work, and make sure that those communities can thrive so that ultimately all of us can thrive. And with that, I will pass it over to Eli for any closing remarks before we hop off. Oh, Eli, are you there? He might
In
have.
the absence of Eli, I can say that it was great. Thanks to everyone for attending. It was great to see so many transit partners and allies from around the country participating. And I think that makes me hopeful and realize that we could do more work on a national level about how to support each other.
Absolutely. More to come soon. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us today, and we will see you at one of the many Transit Month events happening near you.